We can start right at the beginning. Kat told me that you grew up in New Orleans. So, what sex ed did you receive as a young person? And if so, where and when did you receive that sexual education?
So when you say sex education, and I think about this a lot, are you speaking of formal sex education, like in the schools or through an institution, or you're just talking about messages and information, which I think are the foundation of people's core values and beliefs about sex ed, which don't even happen in a formal way, which comes from family and community. So you're talking about what? And so when I looked at your questions, I thought about that in both ways. So I'm going to be sharing sort of in both ways because I think that they both reinforce the other, even with a good medically accurate, comprehensive sex education. People, and especially young people, need a family, community, and significant others that reinforce and align that. At Planned Parenthood, we used to say the primary sex educators of children are their parents or their guardians, that people come to us when we even provide the formal sex education already with core values, beliefs, shame, and most of the times our sex education and information and curriculum is trying to undo some of that. So for me, growing up in New Orleans, going to public schools, and being from a totally different generation, we did have some sex education in the schools. We got that probably in ninth grade. I went to Back Maine, I remember, in our gym classes. Now, ninth grade, which about 13, 14 years old, you know how late that is. They separated boys from girls. They talked about body changes, some anatomy, physiology, menstrual period, those kinds of things. But did we get information around contraceptives and barrier methods? No. Did we get information around sexually transmitted diseases and infections? No. I think HIV was just really they weren't talking about HIV. It was more AIDS, and it was more, othering that happened to homosexual people and the blaming. So there wasn't as much knowledge or understanding of what that disease was. So, the formal education was too little, too late.
Oh.
But on the side of my values around sex education, I think a lot of those came from the home. I had parents who were very open about sexuality issues. I am the firstborn of a young mother who was a teen mother. I remember growing up, we lived in the Callio housing development at the time, and we would sit around the table in the morning, and my mom would give me and my little sister and brothers Flintstone vitamins. And she would give each of us a vitamin, and it was the same time that she took her birth control pill in the morning. And I would say, the naivety of me as a child would say, well, Mama, why do you take that pill? Why you don't take a Flintstone vitamin like us? And she said to me, well, this is a vitamin for women, and it makes our body strong so we can only have a baby when we want to. So I may have been about 8. I didn't really understand what she was saying to me, but that was a very powerful message. Then I remember, because what I saw around me was young women, aunts, uncles, cousins, family members, just, having unplanned, although they may have later been wanted pregnancies. So I'm seeing that's the sociologist in me. Like I've always kind of wanted to understand, why does my world look and operate like this? Then I remember later as a teenager, about 16 years old, when you're starting to date, and dating during my time meant my boyfriend could come to visit. That's all it meant. And you sit in the room with the whole family, And so I remember walking my boyfriend to the door, and my dad then coming back in, and maybe I had kissed my boyfriend or something at the door, and my daddy must have saw it. And I came in and he said, yeah, I saw what you've been doing at that door. So I'm embarrassed because that's my daddy, saying that to me. And he said to me, he says, remember that your body is the most precious thing that you can share with a man. So be careful in how you share it. And I was like, oh, daddy, I don't want to talk about that. Of course, I'm embarrassed, but that message resonated with me. So again, the education piece, I feel, flows two ways. Family, community, and then formal sex education.
100%. And I love your story about the Flintstone vitamins so much. That's so amazing. But you're so right that it was a lesson from a young age. And it seems like you, would it be correct to say, received more meaningful sex ed in the home and from your family rather than school, which did not sound comprehensive at all.
No, and so that's why, I guess I love Planned Parenthood so much. So getting the bits and pieces of information. What I remember so much, I didn't know anything about Planned Parenthood. And then I go to college and I meet a college professor who later became my mentor. And the reason that I'm a sociologist today, Dr. Beverly Wright. She was the first Black woman on the board of Planned Parenthood. And her research was on teen pregnancy. And she knew about my interest in that. And she says, you should volunteer with Planned Parenthood. And so I didn't even know what Planned Parenthood was. But at that time, which was in the 80s, Planned Parenthood could go into schools and talk to young people about making responsible sexual decisions. And so I went to a volunteer training to be a part of the Speakers Bureau. And this quote or whatever resonates with me all the time, says, when a woman controls her body, she controls her life. So all of that came together. My mama was controlling her body so that she could do what she wanted to do with her life. And meaning that you didn't have to let things just happen to you. Having a child is a choice. It's not, something that should just happen to you. Now, things do happen that we can't control. But you can be in control of your body and when do you want to be a parent. So that just you ever have a aha moment? Wow. I learned something that's going to be so liberating. That's a Coogee chocolate. That was a liberating moment. And I was self-determined. I'm going to have a child when I want to have a child. I'm going to say when, and I'm going to say how many I want to have. It is my choice. And, yeah. So that is what got me. And I wanted everybody else to have that knowledge and information so that they could navigate their lives the way that they wanted to. And so that's why I started volunteering with Planned Parenthood. We could go into the schools. We had 4 core sessions that we did. I always remember, it was responsible sexual decision making. It was contraceptives and barrier methods. It was STIs, understanding, not the scare tactics. And it was HIV and AIDS. And, helping, giving young people that information, answering their questions so that they get, again, medically accurate information. And responsible decision-making, also it was anatomy, physiology, knowing your body, how it works. Yeah, those kinds of things.
Well, I love that quote, too. Thank you so much for sharing that. Did you go to college in New Orleans when you started as a volunteer? And
yes.
Were you actually, it sounds like you were the one going into schools and teaching on those four courses. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah. So, Zoe, I am, like I say, a natural. I'm naturally New Orleans. I grew up here. I went to school here. I've traveled around the country and other places in the world, but I love New Orleans. And I am so committed to lifting up Louisiana, because this is a place that people are drawn to. And I also want it to be a place where our children and others can grow up and have what they need. So at that time, I went to McMain, the high school. Then I went to the University of New Orleans, which we call UNO. And that's where I met my college professor, Dr. Beverly Wright. So I started going into the schools, doing presentations. And I really got so good and, well versed in it, that my community got to know me. I was doing presentations in the community, at youth serving organizations, faith organizations. Like I used to almost be called like the Black Dr. Ruth. Most people, I go to the universities, Tulane, Loyola, teaching college students, and then ultimately training some of them to be volunteers of the Speakers Bureau. I went on to get my master's at UNO. And my master's, which is so interesting, I still have my master's thesis. It was a comparative analysis of Planned Parenthood services and the state family planning contraceptive services, and which was more suitable for youth, and why. And what I found in that study, I looked at like some quantitative data, like numbers of young people that were coming, age, that kind of thing. And then I was able to run a couple of patient focus groups or young people focus group at both health centers to learn why they were going there, what was good about the services, what was a gap in the services, to inform the service providers and, how they might do a better job of reaching and engaging young people and making sure that they were compliant contraceptives. And of course, we found that, young people really like going to Planned Parenthood because they were compassionate, those kinds of things. The challenge for Planned Parenthood at that time was pay. And the reason that young people were going to the state, was because it, was free, if you will. So, so I really got so good at, like I was saying, Planned Parenthood offered me. So when I finished college, I went on to work at Covenant House. That was my first professional job. And so I ran their, it was like a crisis center, where homeless youth go. And I started their mother-child program. Because what we found was that a lot of the children who were homeless were teen moms. Mm-hmm. We had young mothers from the New Orleans area who had not only one, but 2 and 3 children. We had one young mother, I never forget, she had 5 children. And she was like 19, 20, and had started having children like 13. So like what we found that at that time in the 80s, it wasn't just a first teen pregnancy, it was this repeat teen pregnancy. Mm-hmm. So I worked there for a while, and then the director of education position became available at Planned Parenthood, and they offered me the position. So that was like so, affirming and humbling to lead the sex education work. I loved working there because it was just a group of women who were committed to sexual and reproductive health access and education and advocacy. And, we just took care of each other. I worked under Terry Bartlett, Julie Redmond, an amazing fund development person, Kyrie Sholaman, who ran the clinic. We were in a shotgun double on Magazine Street. One side was the health center, like the living room, the dining room was the reception area. The 2 bedrooms were the exam rooms. The kitchen was the lab. And the other side of the double was the like administration where we were. And so it was always some strategizing going on. There was always people coming in, like legislative people, talking to Terry, planning for the legislative session. Actually, it was during my tenure at Planned Parenthood that I had my daughter, and so that was so exciting, that she was born during my time working at Planned Parenthood.
That is so special. Wow. Wow. And I love that just sex ed has been this common theme throughout your life, even with your time and your thesis and all the things. When you were at the Covenant House and started the mother-child program, that just seems incredible to support so many people, especially young people. Were you providing sex ed as a program there, or was it more just crisis support services?
No, it was more parenting work. So, Covenant House is very connected to the Catholic Church, so they were not fairly open to sex information and education, but there are ways that you can talk about parenting and your identity formation and who you are as a young parent or a young woman, and to get some of those messages to them. Something I wanted to say. Another place that I was really adamant about sex education was in my church and through my ministry. I was at a church, and I never forget my pastor. Like, we had all these different ministries. We had the evangelist and outreach ministry. We had the men's ministry. We had the women's ministry. We had the young people's ministry. And so my pastor said, well, what ministry are you going to do? And I said, I'm doing the sexuality ministry. It's like, well, we don't have a sexuality ministry. And I don't know if I said, no, it doesn't have to be a sexuality ministry. That's not what I want. I believe that sexuality ministry needs to be integrated into all of these different ministries. Like, when you're doing outreach and evangelism, how can you not deal with the sexuality and those issues that are confronting people, whether they're homeless or whatever in community? When you're talking the couples ministry, you're in the church, but let's get real. Like, that's a piece of it. So, and I believe too, when it comes to sexuality, abortion care, and access, that God is, we used to talk about choice then. I believe that the God I serve is pro-choice. I believe that God does not, put his will on us. He speaks what he desires for us, and it is our choice to make. And then he loves us unconditionally. You know what I'm saying? Even when we don't do what he may want. So he is a forgiving person. He loves us unconditionally. He is compassionate. All the things that we say that we are as Planned Parent. He is non-judgmental. And he made us all in his image. That's what I love about God. He has a sense of humor. Like, if we were all the same, how boring would it be? He made us whatever pronoun we want, how we see ourselves. All of that, I believe, is the diversity and inclusiveness of God. So, yeah, God is pro-choice. And I believe that the opposition does not have a monopoly on faith. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things, and I'm jumping ahead, but this relates to sex education, we have to let people know that your faith matters. You can lead with your faith and your conviction and your beliefs, because, the opposition and other folks want to portray us as if we're not. And then when you're talking about educating all people, and especially Black and brown and other oppressed and marginalized groups, we are people of faith and culture. Those are assets. I know all the pathologies. Like, as a researcher, I don't start with the problems that my people have. I start with the assets. When they wanted to recruit you to Tulane, they ain't talk about, Louisiana has so much poverty. New Orleans got all this crime. They say, come to New Orleans, you're going to get a quality education. The culture here is wonderful. The assets. Lead with that when you're talking about empowering people. All right, Zoe, don't get me started. Go ahead. Ask me next question.
This is all great. I appreciate all of your answers, and I think faith is so important. And I think, like you said, the opposition tries to frame faith in a certain way, but it's such an important part of sex education, and you can be a faithful person and also be pro-choice and stand for comprehensive education.
And there's so many religions that do. And there's a curriculum that we used with our, when I just recently was leading our work here. It's called Our Whole Lives, or the OWL curriculum. Are you familiar?
I am, with the Unitarian Church, and they also are with another one.
And that is so critical to use that with parents. When I was at Planned Parenthood, this was the first time we did a program that we called, Straight Talk. And it was a education workshop for parents and their young people. Like, we tried to get parents, like preteens, like that tween age between adolescent, that young puberty, adolescent age. And so we would bring them together. And of course, teenagers like me don't want to talk around about sex and information with their parents. And even if their parents have the answers, they don't want them from them. But having that, and then parents too they know the information they don't have. They look to organizations like Planned Parenthood. Parents need help. And so they saw Planned Parenthood as a resource, and again, a parent's role is to give your child whatever core values and beliefs you have as the guardian or your family. I'm just here to tell you what is medically accurate information and to support you in having those courageous conversations with your kids. And she'll, even though you may be embarrassed, you're going to know when you're ready. You can go to your parents and they'll understand. And you may know that as a young person yourself. There's some things you may feel uncomfortable with going to your parents about, but when you need to, when a parent is comfortable, when a parent doesn't shame their child, what they can go. And I'll give you an example. Like, I told you about the Flintstone vitamins. When I decided to become sexually active, I remember going to my mom and saying, Mom, I'm having sex now. And she was like, oh, I don't want to hear it. I said, oh, I got to tell you, just jokingly. And we just both laughed and we didn't say another word. It's like, she didn't want to know,
Oh, well, like you said, courageous conversations. So important. When you were the director of education services at Planned Parenthood, was that around the same time that you were involved with Coogee?
Yeah, with the Coogee Center. So let me tell you how that happened. So at that time, there was a coalition. It was called the St. Thomas Irish Channel Coalition. And it was led by the residents of the St. Thomas Public Housing Development and the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. It's an institution you should look at, and they do undoing racism workshops. And so it was the first time during that coalition work that I was exposed to an undoing racism workshop and understanding the role that race and racism plays in perpetuating some of the oppression that we're seeing that Black and brown people are experiencing. And the People's Institute's core value was that everybody who participated in this coalition, all the different organizations, had to do undoing racism. So Planned Parenthood was an organization. Agenda for Children was an organization. Agenda for Children did advocacy and policy work for young people. Kingsley House was a organization. And so all of those entities had come together, and there was a teen pregnancy program in New York that Dr. Michael Carrera led that was well known and respected. And I think it was Terry that had introduced the consortium to that program, because Terry Bartlett from, again, there was such high teen pregnancy rates, repeat teen pregnancy rate. So that coalition decided to create a teen pregnancy program. And the program that they created and funded was Coogee Chakalia. And Crystal Jones Taylor was the executive director. And Planned Parenthood had a contract with the program to do the teen pregnancy work. And so I designed all of the sessions that the young people went through, implemented the sessions, also did the training. I just kind of took our Planned Parenthood work and put it in Coogee Center. And a lot of those young people are grown and still remember me and us, and we keep in contact. But that is how we got into doing that work with Coogee Chakalia. So I ran, again, their teen pregnancy component.
Was that, it sounds like it was just kind of, were you the sole representative from Planned Parenthood doing that work, and with you designing the curriculum? That seems like it was that all you, or did you have any help from Planned Parenthood doing this work at Coogee Center?
So I was a Planned Parenthood representative that was leading on the work. Yeah. So Terry Bartlett was involved because she sat on the consortium. If you understand how coalitions were, like the administrative things, the planning, the negotiation with the contract, I was like the program director for the sex education component. And there were other things, like they were doing financial literacy. They were doing, like education and what is it like when you going blank? I've been out of school so long. You know, when the kids are preparing like for their ACT, SAT prep. You know, so they had all these different components to help young people, with their education and navigate towards going to college. And again, there was a sex education component which I did. And then one of the things that I really liked that I did there that started me for the next wave of work was I trained one of the parents. Maybe it was one or two, but one I remember to be like, it was a parent and then it was another community leader, like to be the education assistants for me so that they had some of the knowledge and information as well.
Wow. I love that it sounds like a really holistic and supportive program by offering, like you said, from college readiness to sex ed to financial literacy. How long were you involved with QG, and do you know when the center stopped operating?
I don't have the exact dates. I'm going to send you my resume or my Vita. It has everything. If you want to look at like a timeline, my Vita has all this in it. But what I want to share is that work, so, it's like the area of teen pregnancy was being researched and people were growing. So a lot of the programming at one time was about, again, like, it's just like if you give people information is not enough to change behavior. That's my point. So just because you have the knowledge and the information, will you make different choices? And for me, that's where family and community almost, I feel like it's concentric circles. With the end of it, you're navigating all of this based upon that. So those things are, what is it? I'm losing my words, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm gonna go on. It's gonna come to me. But so with the Coogee Center, like so you could only help so many kids too. Mm-hmm. So you got to think about scale and sustainability. So in a teen pregnancy program, let's say you could help 50 kids a year. Okay. But they're living in a community that's not reinforcing what they're getting in a program. Mm-hmm. So it's just like a drug addict. I always use this as my example. As long as when you put an addict in a rehab program and you give them all the supports and the confinement they need, they can successfully not use drugs. Mm-hmm. The key to that is when you could go back into a community and hopefully it has the same values and support and you could stay sober. Okay, so because of that program, another initiative was launched that really focused on those community variables. And I was offered the position to lead that community effort in St. Thomas. And it was called Plain Talk. So I was still working at Planned Parenthood, and this other very rich and influential foundation called the Annie Casey Foundation, which is the family foundation that owns UPS trucks, invested its first $1 million in New Orleans with Plain Talk. And so Plain Talk, the St. Thomas Irish Channel Consortium, that collaborative, asked me to lead Planned Parenthood and to lead Plain Talk. And Plain Talk was, and of course it was a bone of contention because Terry said Planned Parenthood was like, well, can Petrice do it like we did with the Coogee Center, where I am the program director? Mm-hmm. But Sticks saw something much larger and different. And I would never forget, my baby was about 6 months old. I had just had her 6 months, 7 months. And I said, okay, I want to do this. And that program was about how does a community protect its most vulnerable youth, those who are sexually active. So teen pregnancy programs, most of them are saying, don't just say no, don't have sex till you get out of high school, graduate. When the reality in many of these communities, kids are sexually active. There's a lot of incest. There's other sexual trauma things that they're dealing with. We found from some of the research, girls are getting pregnant by the age of 16. Kids out there playing, you think they're playing hide and go seek. They playing catch, kiss, get a little bit. I catch you, I kiss you, I get to roll up. This were the games, the economic things. You got a 15, 16-year-old girl dating a 20, 21, 22-year-old guy. Why? He can get her hair done, get her nails done, take out to eat. Like, this is the reality. Then you have a community that is poor and impoverished. Public housing. St. Thomas, you have so many social service and health organizations in this community. Some of them that have been there for hundreds of years, like Kingsley House. So a young person can walk out of their house and go 2 or 3 blocks and hit an organization that's supposed to be there to help them. But yet and still, these problems are persisting. Health service providers are open when they want to be open, 9 to 5. Mm-hmm. When folk working, children in school. So, how do we change that dynamic and those institutions are more accountable to the people that live there? That's putting a racial lens on it. So this started with training natural leaders, which is something I believe strongly in. Training natural leaders in the community. Yes, you're going to have your formal sex education sessions, but how do you train the people that live there to have ownership of this? So we started with the Plain Talk initiative by training young people and their parents. First, young people to survey other young people about their information, knowledge, questions about sexuality. Parents to survey institutions about when they were open and what they provided. And then for the residents to almost like be the social scientists of this, like to look at what they learned, to analyze the data, to say what it means, and then to become the agents of change in their own community. And so I created something that we called Walkers and Talkers, Planned Parenthood Walkers and Talkers. There's this song by DJ Jubilee. DJ Jubilee? You've been in New Orleans now.
Maybe I'm sure I've heard him.
You gotta go listen to it. DJ Jubilee was in St. Thomas. Talk that stuff now, roll with it. Talk that. You heard that before.
This is sounding. Oh yes.
Walking like a dog. Yeah. Yeah. Talk that stuff now. Yeah. All that was during that time. Where people, you got to talk that talk now. Now you got to deal with it, roll with it. That's what some had. So Plain Talk. Planned Parenthood. It was Plain Talk Walkers and Talkers. And what we did was train them to be the researchers, train them to do, and we did what we called home health parties. That's what I started. Well, I had started the home health parties when I was at Planned Parenthood. These were conversations in people's homes, non-threatening. They could invite their friends or whatever. And it was mainly focused on repeat pregnancies, getting information, learning about resources. And so the Walker Talker built on that, where we, throughout the housing development, we did a chart and we'd have building leaders and invite people in your building to learn about this. Somebody might cook a meal. We paid for them to cook the meal. Somebody will come in. We talk about resources in the community, what people in the building need, how to get there, what children need. That, information was left. So the community became the agents of change. We got some service providers like health centers, like there was a St. Thomas Health Center there, open up when people need them, to have a Saturday clinic when young people could come, have an after-hour clinic when parents who may be working could come, 24-hour child care, or finding places like that. Another group that I was really proud of that was started, that was the impetus of this work and is foundational to some of the work and research that I did, is we have to include men in these conversations. Yes, this is a women's movement, and for me, that's what's different. I consider myself a womanist. Like, I know that there are things that men have done that are oppressive to us, but in the cultural context of Black people, many of us, we love our fathers, our grandfathers, our uncle, and so they need the same support and information. And then when I talked about some of the dynamics, men have to be brought into these conversations about consent, sexual and reproductive health, understanding STIs, because they're going to also be the fathers of future daughters. So I got a consultant that was a man, because I think that men need a place and space to gather and talk about this as men. And I, as a woman, not that I can't do it, I shouldn't be doing it, or I could do it with them. So hired someone to begin to lead male only. And that's what we used to call them, the male only, like members only sessions that focus on getting this information intentionally to men and the resources that they need. Because this goes to where I'm going to go next later with my dissertation. Where do men get information? Where do men get services? And that's what men will tell you. A lot of the things men don't get the same information about how their body works. What are the changes? Contraceptives and barrier methods. If they care about their partner, they want to understand how to protect them as well. So we needed to be more intentional with our boys and men. So we had these sessions, and another powerful piece that's still operating now, Plain Talk Walkers and Talkers, that became a model for community engagement. Another piece that became a model was this engaging men in conversations. And out of that work came a group called Black Men United for Change. And those men today are still doing, many of them, education and advocacy work around things that are oppressing Black men and boys and families. So, it was very exciting. I loved that project. I think it set the stage and page for community stage and for community empowerment. Several of the young people, I remember my Pooja as well, when you talk to Crystal, but I remember my administrative person, the person who I hired when I was the director. She only had a GED, and she was in Job Corps, which is a job training program. And I used to go to her, and she said, "Hey, Miss Petrice, I want to be like you." I said, "Well, you know what? You can not only be like me, you can be better than me. But there are things that you have to do. I'm here, I'm from New Orleans, but I didn't grow up in St. Thomas. I grew up in Acalio, and that was important. That was her development. That was her community. But I'm over there leading the work, not because I'm smart or anything, but credentials matter. We live in a knowledge-based world. And the first thing people look at are your credentials. Now, a lot of things I'm saying to you, it didn't take a PhD for me to understand. But it did take me getting a PhD to get in rooms and places, to be invited to tables, you understand, Zoe, to say it. Because that is how institutional racism sometimes works. People won't even hear you unless you look and speak and have so many kinds of letters behind your name. So I was like, yeah, you want to do this? This is what you need to do. This is the game. And that's what it is, the game. You want to be in there, you got to play it. It's how you get there. And so that young lady, she later went on to get her PhD. She has a PhD now, lives in Philly. I mean, she had her name tattooed across here. I was like, girl, you got to clean that up. Because at that time, that's in the 80s, you got big gold, like, you know, that's what we look like. That's how we dress. That's how we roll. But folk not going to take you serious. Mm-hmm. All right.
Well, you've certainly touched on a lot of challenges that sex ed advocates face, from institutional racism and being welcomed into spaces. Are there any other challenges that you faced in this field that we haven't talked about, like backlash from community members or legal challenges that you have encountered in your work?
Yeah. Not so much personal to me, but what brought me back to this is I see how legislative policy or legislators have chipped away at sex education policies, you know, to really set us back, you know, and like that has like been a big challenge. And like seeing how the Louisiana legislature work. So I'm telling you, we went through all this here. I remember Terry's work to get how many times did we go to the legislature talking about the importance of medically accurate sexuality information and education? Mm-hmm. And so slow, you know, and then I saw how the legislature slowly chipped away at that. Access to information and education, access to services, access health, sexual and reproductive health services, and then even more so access to abortion care. When I started doing this work, we had over 20-something abortion providers in Louisiana. Independent providers, Planned Parenthood didn't. But like all of those things were taken away. Now Planned Parenthood can't even go into schools. It is against the law, you know. And so like I'm sitting at the university, I was at Loyola University, and I'm like, wow. Every right and access that I had to information and education, like the children now and the children of the future in Louisiana are not going to have it. And so for me, that's why the sex education model has to be aligned with advocacy, because I say education for what? And that's in everything I do. I always say, I understand all these theories and ideas, but how do they translate into practice? That's why I love working with college students and young people. Or an archive for what? You know, if it doesn't have any public implications for empowerment. And so for me, education and knowledge is not just for empowerment, it's for liberation of those who are oppressed. So Planned Parenthood, for example's education model is you have these health educators, and you probably can't afford but one or two, and you got a whole state. So, and more than likely, they're in progressive places like New Orleans and then Baton Rouge, which not as progressive, but progressive. So I'm saying, like, how do you take that to scale and sustain it where it gets to the people who need it most? So for me, it's this training of trainers model. Like the movement building work is so critical now, and education has to be aligned with advocacy. So when people know is one part of it, and then how do they become agents of change like we did in St. Thomas with our walkers of talkers, is not enough for you to know. It wasn't enough for me to know. Once I knew, I wanted everybody I know to know. I wanted my cousin them. I talked to my, little cousins, my siblings. Everybody knew they could come to me and get information. I'm not going to tell them what to do, but at least you could get the information, know about resources so you could do what you need to do. So we have to create a model. We got a whole lot of advocates making noise. And a lot of times they're not even from Louisiana. Because see, these legislators, Zoe, they don't care. They don't have any respect, first of all, or fear for the advocates and for Planned Parenthood. Who do they respect? Their constituents. So we got to get the average person to understand why this is so critical to their lives. That is the work, like I've seen that, like that's how you create the change. So that's what sex education has to do. It has to become more aligned with the advocacy and change work And so it may not look like a formal session. It has to be some of these house sessions. It's got to be working with faith leaders. It's got to be in the barber shops and the beauty salon and the nail salon. It's got to be some sort of way where we out there having fun in the second line. And the mind is got to come together with the culture and the assets and the things we believe in. So I'm visionary, as you can tell. But I believe the word says without a vision, what happens? The people perish. And I believe that is why people are perishing now, because there is no vision. We got programming, we got help. People understand how to provide services to people, but they don't understand how to motivate people and create a movement. That's what brought about change for all oppressed people. Think about every time there was oppression. Did we have an education class? No, we create a movement. So we got to take education and create a movement with it throughout the state. We got to get in Central. You ever been to Central Louisiana? You ever been to Northern Louisiana? You ever been to any of these other places?
I have not. I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas, so it's a lot of Tulane students, I feel like, just kind of stay in this New Orleans bubble and don't explore the rest of the state.
Really? Because guess what? That's what's killing us. Mm-hmm. The rest of the state. New Orleans is right on its politics. Our delegation, they're going to vote right at the legislature or vote in accordance with our position. I'm not going to say right, with our position. But what is killing us is if we don't get into these other places and create alliances with real people who can hold legislators accountable, we can't win. It's going to get worse. And everybody want to come to New Orleans. But we got to get out of our comfort zone.
Yeah. You mentioned things getting worse, and I agree that alliances are the way to go to prevent an already not great situation from getting worse. Since you've done so much incredible work in New Orleans for years, do you think there was a time when youth in New Orleans were best served? You also talked about how Planned Parenthood can't even go into schools anymore. Do you think the situation was better a decade or two ago?
Well, definitely for access, it was better. Mm-hmm. Whether it was, reproductive health care, abortion access, education. Yes, it was better. Mm-hmm. Like, it is worse now. And I guess the challenge is, again, I come from a different generation. I want to hear, I don't hear with what happened to Planned Parenthood. I don't hear people being alarmed. Now, and I had to go through this, who should Planned Parenthood be here? I think, should Planned Parenthood be leading and doing some of this work? I believe that we should. Because I believe that Planned Parenthood, when it comes to health, there are other service providers that provide the same services that Planned Parenthood was providing. I don't think they have the same compassionate, non-judgmental quality care model that we had. And that's because they don't have the political nimbleness that we had. Because when it comes to government, we're not going to compromise our position around certain things. We're going to talk about abortion and abortion access as much as we can. We're not going to break the law, because that would be a problem providing services, but it's different. So, and I think Planned Parenthood has a reputation around sexuality, information, and education, and being, a trusted and knowledgeable source for that. And so I think we have to find ways to continue that education piece, which is so critical, but we have to figure out how to take it to scale and it's sustainable, in a very cost efficient way. And I believe that a strong training of trainers model is one way to do that. I had started what we call community health ambassadors, and it was going really, really well. And again, it's the same thing, training people in the community, not keeping all of our knowledge and information, but giving it to community, trusted leaders and others in the community to be able to, give it to their community.
It sounds like training others is an action step we can all take to keep promoting sex ed, but do you have hope for the city and the state on how we can advance the state of sex ed and reproductive health, especially for young people? What do you imagine these next few years or the future in general will look like?
I have a lot of hope. And it's my faith that allows me, like without hope and faith, like we just might as well be dead. So I have a lot of hope. I believe in young people. I believe that you all are going to find a way to take this to the next level. I feel like one of the things maybe we didn't do is get out the way and allow you to do that. You know what I'm saying? So it is going to be so important to you all and the next generation and what you all want. So I believe that you can do it and will do it. I think sometimes it takes this, like for it to be in a worst case situation where some people's eyes get open for the first time. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So maybe we protected you all and we thought, it was over. But I feel like now people know what the game and the plan is of the opposition. So I believe something wonderful is going to come out of this. Like I've been talking about like reimagining, like that's the sociological imagination I have. I don't navigate the world in the way that it is. It's like the world that I want it to be. So I am reimagining what could this look like when you have a blank slate. It's an opportunity. So this is an opportunity for us to create something new and different and be intentional about it. And shame on us if we create the same thing. All the curriculums and information and research just sitting on a shelf. Shame on us. We already know, and I say this, we already know what is good sexual and reproductive health policy. We already know what is, promising sexual and reproductive health education. We have done this research since the 70s. Didn't I just tell you when I was in college? We know what works. What we have not done is build a way, I don't think, to not let the elite, and that's some of us, own it and lead it. How do we give it to the people? It's like, don't give a man a fish, teach him to fish. Give it to the people that's most, it is, give it to them and let them become their own agents of change. So for me, like as Planned Parenthood, when people think about Planned Parenthood, the thing I feel they think about the most is the movement, that this was a movement that changed the course of how America addressed sexual and reproductive health for women and abortion access. It wasn't a simple education session. So I feel like every fight that has liberated people has been movement driven. So that's my bias. I'd love to hear like how you see it differently. You've been studying this. What do you think?
Well, I'm so glad that you have hope. I also have hope, even though it's sometimes very difficult in these times. And I think, the closing of Planned Parenthood last September is something that's on a lot of young people's minds, but I agree that it needs to be talked about more. And even though the organization is no longer here in the city, the work has to continue, and just having these conversations and doing the work that made Planned Parenthood so special and meaningful of actually going to the community, like you said, not having this clinic that's open from 9 to 5, actually walking and talking with folks about the things that matter. I think that's how we can continue to make change with movements and advocacy and bringing men into the conversation too.
And faith leaders and all of those unlikely partners. Mm-hmm. So, who's your historical hero? Who's my Sojourner Truth? Mm. Like my Harriet Tubman. You think it wasn't difficult for them? This is the time now. We are living in a historic time. This is a time for you to be that shero, that hero, that personal. You know what I'm saying? This is your time. Just like it was their time, this is your time. And that's how I see this. This is an opportunity for you to live out your greatness, Zoe. You think it wasn't difficult for them other people? But they just say, I'm going to step up. And that's me. I love to step up and go against the grain. Like, think about something different. So I feel like this is our time for greatness, to show who we really are. And I always talk about this, the Sankofa. Like, this fell in my spirit. You're familiar with the Sankofa bird?
I'm not. Please tell me more.
I want you to look that up and understand it. Because the Sankofa is about our history and just knowing as Black people that we can deal with this. You know, because the bird looks back, but is about moving forward. And so the point is, we have a history. We have known struggle. When you think about the women's movement around this, we have known struggle and strife. So we can move forward knowing that. As Black people, we've been here before. It's not new where we don't have access, where we are being oppressed, where everything that we fought for has been taken away from us. Let's not forget who we are. That's how you call on the ancestors. That's why I say, think about those people who were heroes to you and what they went through. So they're saying, no, Zoe, we've been here. What you hopeless for? We did it. You can do it too.
I'm going to look up the bird. I'm excited. I like the moving forward, but looking back, because we can't let history repeat itself, and learning from history.
We can't. That's right. We can't let it repeat itself. And so we got to learn from what happened. And I think that is sort of why we're in this situation today, because we didn't encourage, I don't know if we didn't encourage, I'm not going to blame anyone, but sometimes people get too comfortable. And see, we got too comfortable. That's why I left Loyola University, because I was comfortable with my, academic job. I always told my staff, in my big office in the Monroe Library, traveling and lecturing and training, and it was a pleasant, easy life. But then when I looked at what was happening in my community around these issues, that was my humble beginning. I said, wow. I want more for the future of Louisiana. I want more for Louisiana. And the only way that we're going to do that is the unit of analysis has to be Louisiana. And more people from Louisiana, those who live, work, worship, and vote in Louisiana, have to care about this and join this movement. And we got to create space for them in it. I feel that's another thing we haven't done. And the opposition has created space for their values and voices. We in this movement have to create space for a range of views that align with, access and reproductive health and choice.
Well, I think ending with the future of Louisiana might be a good spot, but is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you would like to mention?
Nope. If you listen to your stuff and want to come back, let me know. I did, what did I do? Oh, I did give Crystal, I got a Carol, your information, but I'm going to follow up with her. I guess she hasn't followed up with you.
I have not heard anything from her,
Okay.
So I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
All right, will do.
Are there any other individuals that you think I should reach out to that could be good contacts?
So what's your project? Like, this is going into an archives, this for a paper, what is it? What's your product?
So it's a digital exhibit, which will be like a website on the Tulane Libraries page. That way, with it being online, will hopefully be more accessible to anyone who is interested, trying to build off that idea of, like you said, of having this information, but again, what's the purpose of it if it's just gonna sit there? So wanting to be able to share it with others and have this exist on a website for a little while. I'm not sure how long it will be out there, but I hope it will be useful to others who are passionate about sex ed in New Orleans and want to learn more about the history of sex ed.
Okay. Well, good luck with your paper and work. And like I said, we'll follow up as needed, and say hello to my girl Katerina for me.
Will do. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. It means a lot, and just thank you so much for the work that you've done in the city. It just you've helped so many people, and I really appreciate you sharing your story with me.
Oh yeah, I appreciate you. What you're doing to make a difference. It's important, and good luck with your studies and whatever's next with your career.
Well, thank you so much. I'll definitely tell Kat hi from you, and thank you again for everything.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.